Welcome to the Gateway Talks. Amon inquires about supernormal powers. Amon rises and asks, "Now I have heard that not only bodhisattvas, but the followers of other ways also attain to the 5 supernormal powers. How do they differ?" Master Nyuri answers, "They differ in that the followers of other ways believe that there is someone who possesses something, whereas bodhisattvas do not think so. Why not? Because they have fully realized that there is no self." So we're looking at an extract today from The Ceasing of Notions, which is a text that originally is from the Dunhuan caves, from the collection of manuscripts that belong, or that come from Dunhuan, which is on the Silk Route. And that collection has a number of various schools of Buddhism and other things as well in it. It also has some Chan texts, some texts of early Zen, and this is one of them. And this is a publication of a dialogue, which is a series of questions and answers between a pupil, Amon, and his master, Master Nyuri. And we're also lucky enough as well to have a commentary on these quite brief passages by Soko Morinaga Roshi, who was one time president of Hanazono University in Japan. He was also he was also from Daitokuji, trained at Daitokuji and also Myoshinji as well. And he was a Dharma brother to Master Dayu, Venerable Myokyoni as well. And it's the Zen Center that actually published this particular book. So wanted to have a look at this today. It will be giving a link to the text. If you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be a link below this video. And as we can see that this is about supernormal powers, and let's just have a quick look at the commentary from Soko Morinaga Roshi. So he replies, "The 5 supernormal powers of the other ways, or other religions, are 1. To see what is invisible to others, 2. To hear what is inaudible to others, 3. To see into the future and to know the past, 4. To know others' thoughts, 5. To appear at will in any place." So we can see that this is, if we can say, a standard list of supernormal or magical powers that we might come across in religious literature. But, he goes on, when a monk asked Master Rinzai, also known as Lin Chi, what were the supernormal powers and the Buddhist teachings on the supernormal powers, Rinzai answered, 1. In the realm of seeing, not to be deceived by form. 2. In the realm of hearing, not to be deceived by sounds. 3. In the realm of smelling, not to be deceived by odours. 4. In the realm of tasting, not to be deceived by tastes. 5. In the realm of thinking, not to be deceived by notions. That is the truly independent man. He goes on to say, these 2 versions clearly illustrate the difference between what followers of other ways consider to be the supernormal powers and the Buddhist teachings of the powers of a bodhisattva. The former assume a self that attains and possesses these powers, whereas in the bodhisattva it is the functioning of the not-self, or otherwise known as the true nature, the Buddha nature, which does not need to be attained, nor is bound by what has to be attained. So this is a very different take, and we can dive into this and have a look. And we may be sort of thinking, well, here I am, I'm a Zen practitioner. Why are we bothering looking at these lists of supernormal powers and Bodhisattva supernormal powers and supernormal powers of other religions and magic and all this sort of stuff? Why are we looking at these things? Well, there is something very relevant here, because actually it has to do with this sense of ownership and possession of technology, really. Because when we look at supernormal powers or magical powers, we can really just sort of think about any form of power, really, because magical power is a form of power. It's a form of control over the environment, over oneself and over one's environment. And as I like to say, if you go onto into Amazon or to a bookshop like Waterstones, you go and have a look at the Mind, Body, Spirit section. It's a very large section, and there will be a lot of books in there about how to get control, such as how to stop smoking, how to win friends and influence people, how to succeed in business, how to have a fantastic memory, all sorts of things, really. All sorts of things. We want to control our environment, and in the end, when you boil it down, that's what Supernormal Powers is really about. It's about gaining control, and there has to be obviously an owner of that. In other words, there has to be a self. But what that is being contrasted with, what that way of seeing and therefore of acting, what that is being contrasted with, is the functioning of the heart in its natural state. So that's really what we're going to be having a look at in this talk. What does that actually mean? What does it mean, this not self, this acting out of the true nature, or acting out of the Buddha nature, as opposed to I doing, I being in control of, I intending and bringing things about? Well, I remember many, many years ago on a Zen retreat, a session, my own teacher, the late Master Dayu, also known as Miyakyo, she used to give, as all Zen masters do on sessions, gave regular interviews, and we were all expected to go for them. And for 3 out of the 5 days, they were compulsory for everybody. But on 2 of the days, they were optional. And on one of the optional days, very few people went on this particular time. And for the Teisho, for the talk that she actually gave, she admonished us all for that. She said, here you are, you're on a session, why aren't you coming for interview? Yes, I know it's optional, but you should be coming for interview, but you don't. Why is that? And she sort of answered her own question. And she said, the reason you don't come is not because you don't know the answer, it's because you don't understand it, and therefore you won't give it. And I thought, that is the most unreasonable thing that I have ever heard. Of course, if I knew what the answer was, I would go. But the truth is, actually, it is true. We often do know the answers. For example, people might be working on a koan, such as the famous "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" A monk once asked Master Joshu, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" Master Joshu replied, "Moo." And everybody knows the answer to that. It's moo. It's no great shakes. It's no great secret. Point is, it can take a long, long time to have that answer accepted. And although we know the answer to it, we don't want to actually go and give it because we know full well that the master's probably going to say no, and we don't like that rejection, and so I avoid going. And she went on to say, whilst I was sort of thinking that's most unreasonable, she went on to say, she said, for example, she said there are many things that we know how to do, or that we do, but actually when it comes to it, we don't understand how they actually happen. For example, we know how to get up, we know how to walk, we know how to sit down, we know how to open a cupboard and make a cup of tea. But she said, we don't know how we do it. We don't understand the processes by which the muscles move and which muscles in which order move in order to carry out all those things, but we know full well how to do it. We can get up, we can walk, and we can sit down. And what she was really pointing to was really this difference between knowledge in the head and also wisdom in the body as well. And this is why this process of getting to know something, really getting to know something, has to come in through the body. And she used to always say, she said, everything that we really know comes in through the body in one way, shape or form. This is something that we do. And she used to she used to say, there is a wisdom in the body that operates anyway. but often we are just unaware of it. We're blind to it. And she gave an example. She said that when she herself was training in Japan, she got a very little a very small apartment, typical little Japanese apartment, quite close to the temple. It was sort of like one room down on the ground floor and then one upstairs room, and the upstairs room was the bedroom, and there was a little bathroom, a tiny little bathroom, just off that. And she said when you were standing in front of the sink, if you bent down to splash water in your face, for example, she would always crack her behind on the towel rail that was immediately behind her. And she said she did that when she first moved in. She did that a few times. She forgot, and she would bend down and whack. She would hit herself, and she was beginning to think, "My God, I'll have to get a bigger place." And then about 6 months later, she had some friends come to stay from the UK, and she gave them her bedroom, and she slept downstairs. And after the first night, one of them came down and said, "My God, that bathroom's tiny. As soon as I bent down to splash some water in my face, I cracked my behind on the towel rail." And she suddenly realized that for the past 5.5 months, she hadn't cracked her behind on the towel rail at all. She realized that quite outside of her own awareness, the body had adapted to the lack of space, and when she bent over, she did it in such a way that didn't mean that she cracked her behind on the towel rail. But she hadn't consciously done that. And she used to use that as a good example of how the body, if it is given time, will naturally adapt and conform to the circumstances, completely outside of any conscious control or conscious management of it by oneself, so to speak. And this is really what Soka Morinaga is pointing to in this difference. Because if you look at those two lists, the supernormal powers of other ways are really magical powers, as we've said, reading other people's thoughts and, seeing invisible things and hearing inaudible things and so on and so on and so on. But the other one, the other list by Master Rinzai, really takes in the 6 sense spaces, the 5 external physical senses, and also the 6th mental sense as well, and simply says, but not to be deceived by them. And again, it's rather like that nice story of the magician and the Zen master, and they're both in the employ of a great warrior, a sort of lord, and the magician is rather envious of the Zen monk because he seems to have the ear of the warlord a lot more than he himself does, and so he challenges the Zen monk, and in front of the warlord says, "Well, this man thinks that he knows a thing or two, but I also know a thing or two. I have supernormal powers." And so they happen to be passing a waterfall, and he stops and he jumps off his horse, and he walks up to the waterfall, and he makes a magical pass, and he walks through the waterfall, through the curtain of water, and he walks back out, and he's completely bone dry. And he climbs back on his horse, and the warlord looks at the Zen monk as if to say, "And what can you do then?" And so the Zen monk shrugs and jumps down off his horse. He walks up to the waterfall, walks through the curtain of water, walks back through the curtain of water, absolutely sopping wet, drenched. And the warlord is just about to draw his sword when the Zen monk walks right up to him laughing and said, "So you see, my lord, when you walk through a waterfall, you get wet." He said, "It's true, this man might be able to pull off a few tricks like this, but at the end of the day, he will die, and so will you. The power that my supernormal power is that I can say yes to all that, and I'm not afraid of it, and I can teach you the same." And the warlord, being wise also, realizes that that's probably a fairly good insurance for the inevitable, and so obviously continues to have him as his chief advisor. But again, it's this difference between the understanding, the wisdom of understanding the place of things and the scheme of things as well. This is something that is really tremendously important. And actually, if we begin to understand just how fantastic and the amazing powers that the body already has, then actually it borders on the miraculous. In fact, it even can become the miraculous. Perhaps one of the classic things is when you've seen those pictures, I'm sure a lot of people have seen those pictures of the fire walkers, the people that walk on the red hot coals. Bali, they have them. They have other places as well in Southeast Asia as well. And I remember a documentary of a British firewalker who took a lot of people who were facing difficulties in their lives, illnesses, had major disappointments, weren't sure if they could recover, all that sort of thing, and had begun to doubt. They actually doubted their own ability to be able to face the difficulties that they knew were coming to them, or just felt that they couldn't go on, that they had lost, as it were, something of that sort of joie de vivre, or the willingness or to go on because of what had happened to them. They couldn't see the points, that sort of thing. And they had signed up for this course on how to walk on coals. And the guy who was running it, he was a great believer in mind over matter, etc. And this was, following him as he trained them to do this. And they spent most of the day, he was talking to them, and really, he what he was doing was building them up emotionally. He was getting them very excited about the whole thing, giving them something to really look forward to. And then on the floor in the meeting room, he had marked out the length of the fire pit in chalk on the floor, and he got them all to practice walking along this imaginary line, and they had to chant cool wet grass, and all this sort of thing, because this would be mind over matter. And at the same time, outside, they were building the actual fire pit, which takes many hours to put together. And then in the evening, they all went out, and there it was. The fire pit was all ready, the coals had been raked, and in one after the other, he went first, and then they all followed one, and then you step out of the fire pit into a tray of water, and as you can imagine, all these people did it. They all did it, and they were ecstatic. Who wouldn't be ecstatic having just walked over, a burning fire pit? And those people who were facing, some one or two who had been diagnosed with cancer and were about to undergo some very traumatic treatment. They said, "I can do this now. If I can do this, then I can." I can face the treatment as well. And, everybody had there was no doubt about it. They had a real turnaround. Something had really changed quite deep down in them. And it had really helped them. But at the same time, there were scientists there who had been watching and recording and measuring. And they said, there is no mind over matter. We've worked it out. The thickness of the skin, there's always some sweat on the soles of the feet, the speed with which people walk, the length of the fire pit, the amount of time that the foot is actually in contact with the coals. The fire simply hasn't got enough time to penetrate and burn. So there's no doubt this is perfectly possible, with no mind over matter actually needed. And the sort of firewalking guru said, "Oh no, it's definitely mind over matter." And they said, "Well, okay, walk over it, but more slowly." And so he walked over it, and he said, "Okay." So he walked over it again, and they timed him, and they said, "No, you're still walking quickly over it. Slow it down." So he walked over again. They said, "No, you're walked even more quickly that time. Walk over it again, but slow down." And at that point, the guru sort of broke down and said, I can't do it." And at which point the scientists took their shoes and socks off and walked over the fire pit themselves, because they trusted their science. But this is the thing. What was interesting about it was not about the fact that the scientists have worked all this out. It was about who has faith in what. The fact is that the guru and his proteges all had faith in this, in a belief in mind over matter, and that allowed them to do something that the body was possible of doing. anyway. The scientists, because they have faith in their science and in what they are doing, maybe up to that point they may not have been willing to take their shoes and socks off and walk over that fire. Therefore, they were able to do it as well because they had the faith to do it. So they both had faith. Both groups had faith in something. And that allowed the body to carry out something that seems, that looks miraculous. Why does it look miraculous? Because to most of us who are, don't see this sort of spectacle very often, it's not in our ken. It's not in the ambit of what we think, of what I think is possible for myself to do. And that's the whole point, that in the training, in the Zen training, and certainly in the monastic settings or in the temple settings, these students are pushed. They're pushed to the point where it seems impossible. I can't go on. It's not possible. And then they're pushed that little bit further, and suddenly they break through. That self-limiting belief collapses, it falls down. This is known as going beyond I. This is the meaning of the term paramita, those 6 paramitas: giving, discipline, patient endurance, energy, meditation, and wisdom. The Prajna paramita, the wisdom gone beyond, which is the wisdom of the Buddha nature, in fact, synonymous with it. So these are the things that appear impossible to the ordinary everyday self. The self is always seeking to, control and find supernormal powers, not recognizing that the supernormal powers already exist and no one possesses them. They just operate and function when they're required to function. I remember, again, the story of a woman who was involved in a pile-up, a car pile-up on a motorway, on a foggy motorway. When she sort of came to, she looked, and there in front of her she could see that flames were coming out of the bonnet of her car. And, she couldn't open the door because of the impact. So she had to wind down the window. She knew she had to get out, and she climbed out of the window and walked over to the central reservation. The interesting thing was, she said the whole thing was like a dream. It was as if someone else was doing it, and I was almost looking down on myself, at it actually happening. She said, I felt quite calm. There was no emotion, there was no fear, no nothing. She said, I knew I was going to get out. I knew that wasn't the problem. And she said, I just saw myself doing this. And she got over to the central reservation, and she looked down, and there she realized, she saw the bone from her shin sticking out of the side of her leg. The impact had actually shattered her shin. And at that moment, and it was bleeding, and at that moment, she said, when I saw the blood and the bone sticking out of my leg, she said it was like a wave of pain suddenly hit me, and this feeling of calm evaporated, and I passed out. But the point is that something had, in those circumstances, something had woken up and took control and got her out of that danger. And then once it got her out of the danger, it left again. This is something that is with us always, but no one possesses it. No one owns it. It's its own thing. This is the Buddha nature. This is what we call the Buddha nature, for want of a better term. And, it's a little bit like, and getting back to this, something that is inherent anyway, is spoken of again and again and again by the Zen masters. This is the meaning of Master Mummon, who says that the treasures of the house do not come in through the front door, or do not come in through the front gate. Why? Because the treasures of the house are the heirlooms of the house. Every home had its heirlooms. Remember that people didn't move around so much. You inherited the home of your parents, and you lived there after and looking after them, and then they died, and then it was yours, and then your children take over, and so on. So the same domicile, the same homes were kept by families. So the heirlooms were already in the house, usually kept in a large chest. And when you were born into that house, the heirlooms were already there. So they don't come in through the front door because they're inherent. And the heirlooms of the house are symbolic of the Buddha nature, and that's what's being, that the Buddha nature itself is inherent, and its functioning is also inherent as well. And this is also why Master Rinzai says, do not give yourself airs. He said, just be your ordinary selves. But this ordinary self is not the self of I. It's not I, me, myself, and my self-beliefs, and what I want and what I don't want, and my opinions and all the rest of it. These are all added things. The ordinary self is, in fact, the self of no self, if you like, the empty self, out of which the great functioning operates. And this is the ordinary self. Just do not give yourself airs. In other words, don't add anything. Don't put something there that doesn't actually belong to it, and then it becomes clear. It becomes very, very clear. And this is why, for example, I used to find it really annoying when people used to say, oh, but Zazen meditation is a perfectly natural state. Well, there I was sitting, counting one, and legs hurt, and my mind was all over the place. And people saying, oh, but it's, Zazen's known, it is the natural state. It certainly didn't feel like it. But in fact, it's true, it is. It's the state that is there when all those added things, the things that have been karmically conditioned to arise, which is I, finally, settles down, finally ceases to be in the seat and falls off and gets forgotten. Then there are those moments, aren't there? And if we practice Zazen properly and we're coupling it with some daily life practice, then there are times when I am not there, and then something is functioning. Being fast asleep, the alarm goes off. Who wakes me up? Something hears the alarm. Something wakes it up. Even though I'm out cold, something is listening all the time, even in the deepest of sleep. And that one is right here, right now in this room. Again, this is what Master Rinzai refers to when he says, there is a man of no status on this lump of red flesh, who goes in and out of the sense gates 1,000 times a day. Do you know him? So there are those added notions of I that get in the way of the smooth functioning. And from my own experience as well, I remember the very first Zen retreat I went on. It was a weekend retreat up at Throstle Hole in Northumbria, in the northeast of England. And I'd had no experience of Zen training at all. I'd had some experience with meditation, though. Anyway, we spent a lot of the day in meditation, and it came to the evening, and it was about 9 o'clock, and one of the nuns there, it was a silent retreat, one of the nuns there brought in a tray of tea things and put them down and just said, help yourself. And I happened to be nearest the tray, so I went and poured myself a cup of tea, and I was about to pick it up when I suddenly realised that people have formed a queue behind me. This is Britain after all. And I suddenly thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't be selfish and serve myself. Maybe I should serve others. So I turned to the person behind me and said, do you want the tea? And they said, yeah. And I said, do you want sugar? No. So I just gave them. And then there was the next one, so I poured another cup. Do you want milk? No. Do you want sugar? No. Gave them that one. Got about 3 down the line when the nun came back in. And she saw what I was doing, and she just came up and just touched my elbow and said, no, she said, serve yourself and move out of the way and let everybody, serve themselves. It's simpler. And I said, yes, of course, and moved off. But actually inside I was furious because I thought to myself, but I'm only trying to help. But actually I wasn't trying to help. I was actually trying to be good. I was trying to be a good Zen student. And the difference is that the difference is that because what I was trying to do was from the point of view of I didn't see that by doing what I was doing, I was complicating the matter and also breaking the silence as well, because I was saying to people, do you want milk and sugar? And they had to reply yes or no. So, there was one who sees all that and therefore would have just followed the instruction that she said, the initial instruction, which was serve yourselves, help yourself. Just help yourself. That's it. Can't get much more simple than that. But no, 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 no. I now have to complicate that by trying to be good and trying to be virtue signal, which is what we'd call it nowadays. That's basically what I was doing. I was just, putting out the message. I am a good Zen student, aren't I? Don't you think I'm a... Yes, yes, you're a good Zen student. And that's really what it was. So this is where those added things get in the way of the smooth functioning of the heart. So how do we know it's the smooth functioning of the heart, not just an eye-based activity? Well, this is because, and actually it's nicely summed up in the 25th chapter of the Tao Te Ching, the classic of Taoism, and which has had a great influence, of course, on Chinese Buddhism and Chan, Zen, in other words, as well. And the last 4 lines of the 25th chapter says, "Earth obeys the laws of heaven. Man obeys the laws of earth obeys the laws of heaven obeys the laws of the Tao, and the Tao obeys its own inherent nature." The point being that once as a human being, one aligns oneself with the laws of the earth, in other words, of the situation where one is, then immediately, if we are in sync, if we are aligned with the circumstances, then we are aligned with the circumstances not only of earth, but of heaven and of the Tao and the inherent nature itself, all at one and the same time. They align perfectly, and that harmony is the Tao. That is what is meant by the Tao. We would use the term Dharma, obviously. That's what when we talk of when we say that the Dharma means the inherent law or the inherent nature of something, this is what we're referring to. So when it's in other words, to being aligned with or being in sync with the Dharma in this way means that the Dharma is served as a whole. So in that throstle whole example, I was serving myself. The true motivation was to serve myself. I thought I was doing it to be helpful to everybody, but I wasn't. I was serving myself. And because of that one-sidedness, it wasn't serving the Dharma. To just have served myself and moved out of the way, preserved the rule of silence, which would have been preserving the rule of the session, which is why we were all there voluntarily anyway, which would have obeyed the rules of the place as well. That would have been much closer to serving the Dharma, or would have been in alignment with the Dharma. So hopefully we can see that difference. That example maybe gives us a little bit of a difference. And when we when we look, for example, at the Bodhisattva Vows, sentient beings are numberless, I vow to help them all, that help is really about being of service to the Dharma. It's not even about putting your benefit over mine, because that's just flipping it the other way. It's about serving the Dharma as a whole, which is why, after all, the Zen masters can be very strict with their pupils, and can admonish them very severely indeed. It's not about being soft necessarily, but it may be about being soft if the Dharma calls for it. But it may be about being very hard if the Dharma calls for it. But it's what motivates it. What motivates it is that Bodhisattva vow, of service to all beings, and that's what makes the difference. So hopefully that sheds a little bit of light on this. We've gone from supernatural powers of one type and supernatural powers of another type, or supernormal powers, and we can hopefully see the difference between that I doing and being of service to I, and then that emptying out and the supernormal powers themselves emerging quite naturally in the service of the Dharma. Okay, we'll leave it there.